And as usual, we have all gathered here today to listen to another exposition of the Lord Buddha's teaching. Before we commence today's sermon, let us all take a moment to remind ourselves of how extremely fortunate we are that we have today received the most pristine teaching there is, the only path there is to our freedom, path that exists to the achievement of the noble fruits. And we must take a moment, therefore, to reflect on who it is we must be grateful to that we have received this teaching. And that is none other than the perfect one, the magnificent one, the most graceful one, the undefeated one, the Supreme Buddha. Let us take a moment to pay our respects to the Lord Buddha. Let us take a moment to recite the Dhirasa Vigata Mohasa stanzas, which is really a promise that we take, or we make, an oath that we take to be lifelong students of the Buddha. This is our pledge of allegiance, to be true to our own self-conscience, to develop ourselves, cultivate the path, and achieve that which he expected us to achieve. So, to do that, let us all be upstanding and recite the stanzas. Take refuge in the Noble Triple Gem, observe the precepts, and continue with today's proceedings. Dhirassa vigata mohassa pabhinna khilassa vijita vijayassa anighassa susamachitassa buddha silassa sadhupanyassa vesantarassa vimalassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi akatankatissa tusitassa vantalokamissassa muditassa katasamanassa manujassa antimasarirassa narassa anupamassa virajassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi asansayassa kulassa venaikassa sarati varassa anuttarassa ruchira dhammassa nikhankassa abhasakarassa manachidassa virassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi nisabhassa appameyassa gambhirassa munapatassa khemankarassa vedassa dhammattassa sangutatassa sangatigassa muttassa bhagavato tassa Savakohamasmi. Nisabhassa appamiyassa gambhirassa munapatassa Kemankarassa vedassa dhammattassa sangutattassa sangatigassa muttassa bhagavato tassa savakohamasmi. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Please repeat all together and after me. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Saranaгаmanang sampunnang. Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinnādāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kāmesu Micchāchārā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musāvādā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Surameraya majjapamadaṭṭhāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Tisaranena saddhiṃ pañcasīlaṃ dhammang sādhukang surakkhitāṃ kattvā appamādena sampādeta. Okay, you may all now be seated. And also, before we commence today's sermon, let us all take a moment to invite all the celestial beings in this 10,000 world systems, those in the blissful plane as well as those who may today be in the unfortunate woeful planes, however, looking for looking for some respite, looking for a path to free themselves. We must remind ourselves that throughout this samsara, each and every one of them will have been mothers and fathers to us, siblings, acquaintances, friends, individuals who will have helped us on countless occasions. They will have come to our rescue, supported us and assisted us in our times of need. It is therefore now our duty to extend to them what it is that we have. What we have today is the Dhamma, the gift that excels all gifts. So as we are about to embark on this occasion, let us take a moment to invite all the celestial and all the divine beings, all the countless beings out there in the 10,000 world systems, anyone and everyone who may be looking for an opportunity to listen to the Buddha's teaching, to join us and witness this meritorious deed. May the merits that they acquire by engaging in this wonderful meritorious deed help them to redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. And for all sentient beings who are already in the blissful plane, may they be able to listen to the teaching and understand it and comprehend it, and may through that they attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. So as I now make this invitation, I ask you all to extend that invite in your hands, in your hearts and in your minds, out to all the divine beings. Invite them to join us and witness this meritorious deed, acquire merits, and invite them to free themselves from the 4 great hells once and for all, by gaining an understanding of the Dhamma that they will get to listen to today. Samanta Chakravalesu Atra Gachantu Devata Sadhammam Munirajassa Sunantu Saggamukkhadam Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayam Bhadanta Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayam Bhadanta Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayam Bhadanta. Okay. And also before we commence, let us all take a moment to seek refuge, or rather seek forgiveness from the Noble Triple Gem, as well as the Buddha's ministry for any thoughts, words or actions of reviled and desecration that we might have directed towards them, either knowingly or unknowingly, as the consequences of such actions may be, that as we make efforts to quench our thirst for the Dhamma and redeem ourselves once and for all, our path is hindered and it becomes difficult for us to make any progress. So, therefore, let us all take a moment to gather up humility and humbleness within our minds, accept and acknowledge that we have not always been who we may be today. Perhaps today we are kind, gentle and generous, but in this long journey in samsara, we have been anything but. So, let us all take a moment to seek the forgiveness for any thoughts, words or actions of revile, desecration, insult, slander or offense we might have directed towards the Samma Sambuddhas, the Pacceka Buddhas, the Arahata Buddhas, Anagami, Sakratagami, Sotapannas, be they on the path or having attained the fruits, as well as the Buddha's ministry, the Sambuddha Shasana. And as you make this apology, as you seek their forgiveness, I like to remind you all to make a firm resolve to never find yourself conducting yourself in that manner ever again. So let us take a moment to do that. And finally, let us all make a firm resolve that may through the course of this sermon, we be able to understand the Four Noble Truths, understand the teachings of the Buddha, redeem ourselves once and for all from the 4 great hells and attain the noble state of Sotapanna. For any among you who may have already achieved that noble state, may through the course of this sermon you be able to fulfill the subsequent stages and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. So with that hope and resolve, for not just ourselves but for all of us, all sentient beings, Let us now prepare ourselves to listen to the sermon. Okay. I hope day by day you are all moving closer to the ultimate goal of Buddhist philosophy. There was a reason why the Bodhisattva went through immeasurable hardship over many countless births with only one purpose in mind, and why also 45 years throughout his life as the Buddha, having attained perfect awareness for himself, when there was nothing else for him to do for himself, he did not rest one moment. From that point forward, he dedicated his life for you and for me and for everybody. I hope as every day goes by, and with every sermon, with every time you sit down for a meditation, you are moving closer to that goal. Now, I will say I hope. I don't want you also to say, yes, Swami Nahansa, we also hope. Because I can hope for you, but I don't want for you to be hoping that you're moving closer to the ultimate goal of Nibbana for yourself. You should know this. This is something you should know, this is something you should be striving for, and really working day and night for. The ultimate goal of Buddhist philosophy is a realization. And you see, this is the almost peculiar thing about Buddhist philosophy, is at the end of the day, it's a realization. All of this that we do is for a realization. It is to understand something. Now, sure enough, Buddhist philosophy, or rather the rituals and practices and, I suppose, customs and traditions, and in addition to that, culture that has built around Buddhist philosophy has a lot more than simply realization, but all of that is to support this one purpose, this one goal. For instance, it has become part of our culture almost to go to the temple on a Poya day. Most families around the world would do this. They would go to the temple, they would take some flowers with them, perhaps some oil to light the oil lamps, maybe some joss sticks, and they would engage in some ritualistic practices. There is, of course, profound meaning behind all of these actions, but to the untrained mind, a lot of these may seem like rituals. Then there is, of course, engaging in various meritorious deeds like offering alms, offering shelter, medicines and robes, and then various events. Sometimes they may even seem quite ceremonial, like the offering of the Katina robes, or maybe chanting Pirit. So all of this today surrounds Buddhist philosophy, and it can be an adornment to the main goal, to the main purpose, to the main objective of Buddhist philosophy, if you understand the meaning behind these things. That is why whenever we have an event of the like at our monastery, our compeers would provide you with sufficient detail to understand what's going on, why we're doing it, what we are hoping to achieve by doing this, and what you all can hope to achieve by engaging in it as best you can. But we mustn't forget that at the root of all this, this is pure Buddhist philosophy I'm talking about. At the root of all this, all that's there to do is really to realize. It's an understanding. That is why they use the word enlightenment. For instance, when we talk with someone and we are in a conversation and they share some new information with us, something that we may not have heard about before, we may sometimes ask for more information from them and invite them to explain it to us. And on those occasions we may say, please could you enlighten me on this subject? I've not heard of that before. Enlighten me. So to enlighten is really to help me understand what it is you're talking about. So Buddhist philosophy is about understanding. Whereas some other religions may have at its epicenter its ultimate goal to be united with perhaps a divine existence or a supreme, powerful God, or perhaps some other existence in a blissful place somewhere. The core of Buddhist philosophy is an understanding. It's a realization. So this is where it can seem quite odd to some, particularly to observers who may be new to this approach, or rather to this philosophy. Why is it that if what's there to do is to understand, how come people have to offer flowers or light a lamp? What's the understanding to do with that? Because clearly understanding is something to do with the mind, and it's something you can do sat in one place. You don't need to physically do anything to understand something, do you? Is a question that can quite reasonably come into someone's mind. For instance, one could ask, and we have been asked this question, particularly from foreigners to whom Buddhist culture can be quite, well, foreign, who perhaps visit our monastery and they see the Swamin Wahanses going on alms, and devotees who come to the monastery, they offer alms, and then we have the procession of the Buddha Puja, where both monks and the lay, they bring flowers and offer them at the Buddha's feet. And then, of course, there's the Buddha, there's an idol, a statue that is placed somewhere on a high elevation, and people get down on their knees and they worship this statue, right? And then they light incense sticks, light the lamp, and then they recite Gatha to show their respect and as well as to make offerings. So one might question, what's all this got to do with an understanding? Because to understand, you don't need to do anything physically, surely. Understanding is something that is done with the mind. So it's just the mind that is needed to understand. So why all this extra stuff? Now I know none of you would pose that question, given you understand that, well, one of the most important things to understand is that this realization comes into a mind which is abundant with merit. It is the power of merits that bring one this realization. So contrary to what one might believe, to understand, I just need to sit down on a chair somewhere or sit down somewhere and just think about stuff, and then I'll understand. And also, people may feel that way given what they know about the Bodhisattva, of how he sat down under the Bodhi tree. And, in fact, before deciding that he was going to give up the austere practices, he did stuff, right? So he starved himself. So a lot of physical stuff. He starved himself. He laid down naked, and he allowed himself to be scorched in the burning sun, and he allowed him to simply wither away. And when it was raining, and he allowed the cold water to wash his body, and he would sometimes shiver, almost to the point where he dropped dead. He would stand on one foot, hours on, and he would survive the day on just one grain of rice. And towards the latter part of his austere practice, he would only survive on something that would fall into his alms bowl. Only something that would fall into it by coincidence. Nothing that was offered to him. So really, if nature decided to offer something to him, then he would accept that. It came to that point. That's when he fainted once, and fortunately for us, that was the last time he fainted, and the last time he resolved, the last day he resolved to continue with the austere practices. So all of those things involved some activity. You had to do something. And then, after the end of all that, he sat down under the Bodhi tree, having realized that, so this was not the point where he attained ultimate realization, but he came to a realization that what I am hoping to achieve cannot be achieved in this manner. He looked back at his past and he realized, as a prince, I lived in every luxury that life could afford me. And that didn't bring me any closer to the happiness that I want. And then with these 5 ascetics, I have been living a very austere life, putting myself through intense hardship that no other human being could bare, and yet I'm not any closer to my goal. So, how is it that these are the things that he did, and all of that involved some physical activity. And then when he realized that none of this is going to work, he sat down under the Bodhi tree, and before long, what seemed like not doing anything, he attained Buddhahood. Seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it? Excuse me. So he did a lot, and then he did nothing. And when he did a lot, he put himself through a lot, he engaged in a lot of things, he realized at the end of that, all of this is pointless. And then when he sat under the Bodhi tree, having also taken a good meal that was offered to him by Sujata, he sat down under the Bodhi tree and started to contemplate. But for anyone who would look at it from the outside, it appeared that he was doing nothing. So you can imagine under this huge Bodhi tree, the banyan tree, he sat down, legs crossed, arms one on the other, and seems like he's doing nothing. His arms are doing nothing, his legs are doing nothing. The only movement you could probably have seen is his chest. But he continued with that, and one bright full moon day or night, as at the break of dawn, he realized, well, that's it, he realized. He attained perfect realization. This is what's important for us to understand. So there are two things really I want you to understand here. One, that Buddhist philosophy is about a realization. At its core, it is about a realization. Or everything that the Buddha taught us was to realize. In other words, the mind has to be able to accept it as the truth. When the mind has accepted what the Buddha taught as the truth, the mind has realized. Not just because the Buddha taught it, but because, well, that is the truth. And the second thing I want you to understand, I'd like you to understand, is that it would be our loss to assume then that to realize, if realization is what needs to happen, then all of those things that people do, like the going to temple, worshipping the parents, helping others, engaging in numerous meritorious deeds, right? Preambulating the pagoda and making your venerations and offering flowers and pirikara and all those things. Is that all a waste of time? Because if realization is something that needs to be done through the mind faculty, why are people walking up and down, going round, getting on their knees? What's all that got to do with something that needs to happen with the mind? It is, after all, the mind that takes the predominant role here. It is the mind that attains realization. So if it's the mind that attains realization, why do you use your hands to offer flowers? What's that got to do with the mind? The truth of the matter is, you don't really need to be doing anything with your arms and legs, because it is the mind that attains realization. The most famous story I can think of at this moment is that of the offering of the Jetavana monastery by the banker Anatha Pindika. Now, this merchant or banker of the time did a lot. Physically, he would have been quite busy. Imagine building a vast monastery like the Jetavana monastery to home many hundreds of, perhaps thousands of monks, to provide the infrastructure and to build the dwellings for such a huge community of the Sangha. That would have taken a huge effort on his part. And not just the money that needed to be spent on this project, but also his time and the activity, going up and down, going to places, talking to people, having appointments with the king and making sure that his support was available throughout the project, perhaps meetings with the members of the Sangha to ensure that what he was building was appropriate for their requirement. So he would have been a very busy man ever since he started off with the project of building the monastery, right up until the end. And you know, though, that at the end of all this, the power of the merits that he acquired in building the monastery earned him a silver palace in the heavenly plane. But then there was another man, an onlooker. He probably observed the building of the monastery from aside for a while, right? But there is no record of that in the books, but this is my imagination. He probably observed the going-ins and going-ons in the construction site, and when the day came for the monastery to be offered to the Sangha, this man turned up, and he was overjoyed by this magnificent offering to the Buddha and the Sangha, and he brought his arms together, his hands together, and in veneration he rejoiced in this meritorious deed. And the power of the merits that he earned by doing that earned him a golden palace in the heavenly plane. By which we are led to believe that he earned more merits by engaging in that meritorious deed in that way. So it seems like he hardly lifted a finger to build the monastery. He probably wasn't even involved in any of the planning or the design or or labor. He probably didn't even bring a brick. And yet, as an onlooker, he observed everything that was going on. This is my assumption. But he was certainly there when the monastery was being offered to the Sangha. And in that moment, his heart was filled with so much joy. And he made his veneration. He applauded this grand, meritorious event. And the merits he earned from that saw him in a good place. So, where is the merit? Do these 2 points contradict each other? The fact that realization is something that happens in the mind, and yet people seem to engage in various merits for the purpose of mental realization? Think about this for a moment. You will be asked questions like this from people who you may be trying to help onto the path. One might ask, well, do Buddhists worship idols? Why do Buddhists worship statues? People have a statue at home. Now I know there are quite a few among you who offer the Buddha Puja at home. Some in the morning, some in the afternoon, some both. Some offer gilampasa. Some offer a warm glass of water first thing in the morning. Some offer flowers. Others do the same but at the temple. Others give alms to the poor, to the needy, to the Sangha. Right? So there's a lot of activity. Others might organize a Pirit event at home, and they might invite the Sangha, the Swamin Wahanses, to come into their homes and chant Pirit, and then for that they might prepare a Pirit Mandapa at home. And then one might ask the question, hang on a second, I thought Buddhist philosophy and Buddhism is about an understanding. And understanding is something that needs to happen in the mind. So if that's all mental stuff, what's all this physical stuff got to do with that? And this is why I related the story of Anathapindika making the offering of the Jetavana monastery, and one you can refer to when you try to help people with such questions find answers. It is indeed a mental process. So the fact that Buddhist philosophy is all about a mental realization, and merits seem to be done by people using physical things as much as their bodies, they are not in contradict with each other. The truth is, it matters not how busy you make yourself in engaging in a meritorious deed if your mind is not prepared for it. You could well be offering alms to a Swamin Wahanse who might have walked up to you on Pindapata, on an alms round at your home. You might well be offering something to the Swamin Wahanse, but in your mind, if you're either really disliking this, what's going on here, you feel terrible about this monk having walked up to you first thing in the morning and asking for alms, so essentially begging for alms, or you just don't like that fact. You just don't like it, or perhaps you are offering flowers to the Buddha, but you don't like it one bit. You're doing it because you're being forced to do it. In your mind, you're thinking, why won't these people just leave me alone? I don't want to do any of this useless stuff. So in your mind, if that's what's going on, then there is hardly any value in what your arms and your hands are doing to offer those flowers or to offer the alms. There's hardly any value, and it's not going to help a lot in terms of your realization. But whether you make your arms and legs and your fingers and the rest of your body busy or not, even if you were stood still in one place and you had your arms and legs tied down, as you observe a meritorious deed, if in your mind you begin to rejoice, that is what is going to earn you merits. Now, I know that this is familiar territory for most of you. The point I'm trying to make here really is today not about merits per se, but what I'm trying to show you here is that Buddhist philosophy is a realization. It is to help realize. And that realization is all mental, indeed. And all those meritorious deeds that we engage ourselves in, that is all for the purpose of a mental realization. Because this realization starts with the act of giving. And the act of giving, again, is not something that you do with your arms, not something you do with your hands. The act of giving is something that you do with your mind. It's the mental attachment that needs to be given up. Because it is the mental attachment that is the problem. Your physical attachment to things are not going to bring you any pain. Now, of course, if you stick your hand on a hot plate while the plug's switched on, then of course that's going to hurt you. If you put your finger into a kettle of hot water, then of course it's going to hurt you. But you understand that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the mental pain. This mental pain, this mental suffering, is the direct result of a mental attachment. So it is mental attachment that we are trying to rid. And mental attachment is caused by, or is rooted in, non-realization. Non-realization of what, you might ask? Non-realization that attachment leads to suffering. So let me simplify that. The mind attaches because the mind does not know that attachment leads to suffering. What is realization then? Realization is about coming to know that attachment leads to suffering. And that suffering is the product of attachment. That is what realization is. See, it's like when you know why you suffer, that very moment, you're not suffering anymore. How about that? So the reason you're suffering is because you don't know why you're suffering. You know, this is why I find Buddhist philosophy simple and powerful at the same time. It's like none other. It's so unique. You know, like take science for instance, right? So I'm really trying to help you figure something out here. Take science for instance. Now, in science, you can be taught in the classroom or in the laboratory that a fire is caused by a flammable object and oxygen and temperature, the right temperature. When these three factors come together, you have fire, right? So we've all learned this and we know this. Now, imagine there's a fire. Imagine you didn't know what brings about a fire, or what brings a fire about. Imagine you don't know this. I know you know it, but let's just imagine you don't know this, and you see a fire, a blaze. Now, someone comes and tells you, hey, why don't you put out that fire? No, of course, you don't know how to put out a fire. So this is our imagination. So you, in return, you say, what do you mean put out a fire? What does that even mean? Put out a fire? Yes, do you not know that this fire can be extinguished? No, I didn't know that. How do you do that? Well, there are these three causes which bring about a fire. So all you got to do is take away one of the causes, and then that's it. So what must I do then? So the three causes are these: a flammable object, oxygen, and right temperature. So to put out this, what you can do, you might even ask, well, perhaps I can try putting down the temperature, bringing down the temperature. And they'll go, yes, of course you can do that. Then you might even suggest, perhaps I can use some water for that. Of course. Go and try it. See, then, now at this point, have you not realized? Have you not learnt that a fire is caused by attachment? Rather, what? Attachment? Excuse me. That fire is caused by these three factors. Fire is in fact caused by attachment, but I'm talking about a different kind of fire for the time being, right? So fire is caused by the three factors. Now you didn't know this before, but you have learned it now. And you can affect one of these factors if you just threw a bucket of water at the fire, which we know is the factor of heat, or rather temperature. And the temperature drops, and then the fire burns out. So now you have this information. But possessing this information alone in your mind does what to the fire? The fire is on the outside. Say it's a few yards away from you. So previously you were unaware, or previously you were ignorant of how to put a fire out, but now you have learned this information from someone. Now that you know this information, that in itself, please understand, you haven't done anything yet, okay? You have this information now that a fire can be put out by reducing the temperature. You have this information now. Possessing this information alone, by itself, does what to the fire? Clearly the answer is nothing. It does nothing to the fire. That is why you've got to wait for the fire ambulance to arrive. Because if knowledge about how to put out a fire was good enough, then you wouldn't have to wait for the fire ambulance. All you got to do is walk up to a fire and say the words, I know why you are ablaze. Right? It's these three factors. And the moment you say those words, as if you are casting a spell, then the fire has to burn out. Doesn't happen. So now you have to wait until someone comes along and throws water at it. So it is not enough for you to know this. Something needs to happen physically. So you really have to throw water at the fire. That has to happen. Or at least you have to cut out its oxygen supply. That has to happen, and that requires some physical effort. This is really simple stuff, and I'm sure you all understand this. Really simple stuff, right? Anyone can understand what I'm talking about right now. So why am I making this reference? Because I want to show you the distinction. Whereas with the mental suffering, you don't really need to do anything per se. It is a realization. The moment you realize that this is suffering, the cause of suffering becomes obvious. Because realizing what suffering is involves realizing the cause of it. That is why in the Arya discipline, realizing something involves realizing it, or realizing something entirely involves the four things. What 4 things? You have got to realize the thing that you're talking about. You've got to realize the cause of it. You've got to realize that when you cease the cause, the result will cease to exist. And you have also got to realize the path to cease the causes, or the path to the cessation of the cause. These 4 things have to be realized. Now, when you realize one, the other 3 will realize, or will be realized. So, do you see the beauty of it? That it seems like there's nothing to do then. All you got to do is realize, and then that's it. The more you realize, the more you are freed. Realize a little bit more, and you're freed a little bit more. Realize entirely, and you're freed entirely. And that is how one could become a Sotapanna and sit under a tree, or on a rock somewhere, or in a cave somewhere, and they can continue to contemplate on this mentally, and he or she can stand up an Arahant. So they sat down as a Sotapanna, and maybe a couple of hours later, he or she stands up and now they're an Arahant. But you didn't see them doing anything, you didn't see them going on alms, you didn't see them offering flowers or burning incense or anything like that. So how does that happen? That is what I mean by, this is a realization. This is a mental realization, and this mental realization cannot happen when the mind has not trained itself to give up. Not to give in, but rather to give up, to let go. Because after all, Nibbana is the culmination of your practice. Put it another way, Nibbana is what you become, not necessarily something you do. It's what you become. When you realize Nibbana, you have become Nibbana. Now this does not mean that you become some kind of special being or some kind of creature and the Nibbana species. It's nothing like that. Your mind becomes Nibbana. That is why it's a realization. It is something to realize. And all the meritorious deeds that you do along the way, they help with fulfilling the perfections. And what they do is they prepare the mind. They groom the mind, if we use that word there. They groom the mind. It's like pruning a large bush and cutting it down to size and making it neat and tidy. What the merits do is it prunes anything that is not conducive to the state of Nibbana. That is why the Buddha says that the Nibbana is something that is not formed. It is form. It's not even arupi. It's not formless per se. It is not something that exists. By which I don't mean that Nibbana does not exist, so there's no point in striving for it. This is one of the most weird concepts to try and really explain. One of the most abstract concepts to try and explain using material words. What is Nibbana? Sabba Sankara Samato, that is Nibbana. Sabbupatipati Nissaggo, that is Nibbana. Tanhakkayo, that is Nibbana. Virago, that is Nibbana. Nirodho, that is Nibbana. So, you see, Nibbana is something that becomes. Oh, Nibbana is something that your mind becomes. Tanhakkayo. Detachment. The cessation of attachment. The eradication of attachment. The quenching of, or the quelling of attachment. This is Nibbana. It's not a place somewhere. It's not a physical existence somewhere. Or any existence anywhere, really. It's a realization. The moment you realize, the moment you're in Nibbana. Realize what? That the only thing there exists is Nibbana. It is the realization that attachment only leads to suffering, and suffering is the only product of attachment. That is what you need to realize. So you recall from the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Buddha's words were, Idam dukkam, pubbya ananussutesu dhammesu, chakkung udapadi, jnanang udapadi, and so on. See, just study those words for a moment. Idam dukkam. This is suffering. Pubbya ananussutesu dhammesu. Something I have never heard before from anyone. Chakkung udapadi. This has become visible to me. Idam dukkam. This is suffering. This is suffering, and then what? No, that's it. This is suffering. This is suffering because the moment you realize that this is suffering, tell me this for instance, right? How can you understand suffering without understanding that suffering is caused by attachment? Tell me how that is possible. And you know clearly that the suffering we're talking about is a suffering that is to be seen with the wisdom eye. Okay? This is suffering. This is not pain or agony or grief or sorrow. Right? It's not that. Is it not? It's not mentally you're feeling that pain. Say when someone tells you off, or something you put in your mouth has gone foul, and the sensations that start to flow through your mind, those feelings, those emotions, that is not the suffering we're talking about. Because that suffering cannot be something that was seen for the first time by the Buddha. Would you not agree? Now, do you not know that the Buddha, or rather the Bodhisattva, even before he became the Buddha, he was able to look at his past lives. He was able to look back at his past lives and how he spent time as an ascetic, how he spent time as an animal, how he spent time as a human being, as a deva, as a brahma, right? So he was able to look back at his previous lives, even as a bodhisattva. So these were not knowledges that he was bestowed with as he became a Buddha. He was able to look back at his past lives and he was able to recall them in every bit of detail, even as a bodhisattva. Even today we see people who are able to do that. No, they're not necessarily monks as such. They can come from all walks of life. So the Bodhisattva was able to do that. Now, the reason I point this out is, don't you think, as he looked back at these previous existences or previous incarnations, did he not, do you think, realize that physically we all have to suffer one day? When he looked back at his past lives, do you think he only saw times when he was young and healthy and full of vitality? Do you not think that he saw himself as an old man, as a sick man, as a weak and feeble man or woman? Do you not think he saw himself born an animal and being torn up by his predators when he became prey? Do you not think that he saw all the bad and terrible things that might have befallen him, like accidents and being struck by lightning, or maybe falling off a tree and breaking his back, or maybe cutting himself? I can't for one moment think that he was not able to see these things, his previous lives as a bodhisattva. Now, of course, as a Buddha, there was no limit to what he could see. But do you not think, like, take this for instance, you remember at the naming ceremony, there was the ascetic, you recall this from Dasahandru's sermons, right? Where there was the ascetic Asita, who came to name the baby prince, right? Do you remember he smiled and then cried soon after? When questioned by the king as to this sudden change in emotion, do you remember he said, he said, Majesty, I can say with absolute certainty that this young boy will go on to become a great man. The greatest man, in fact. He would go on to become the supremely enlightened one. And that is the reason for my joy. And wonderful news, ascetic. Why then do you shed a tear at such great news? When such a fortune has befallen us, how come you shed a tear? What is the reason for your sorrow? At which point the ascetic says, well, it is only very unfortunate that I will not live long enough to listen to him preach. Now, that's not where I want to stop you thinking. Think about what he said next. He said, I will not live long enough, and I will be born in the formless sphere, the formless plane, the arupa world. So of course he believes in rebirth. Right? So here's a man who believes in rebirth. And he also knows that if he's born in the arupa world, then the Buddha is not going to be able to come and preach to him. Because in the arupa world you don't have a physical body. So no ears then. So sound, light, these things don't exist in that realm. Right? So he knew of rebirth, and if he knew that he was going to be reborn, did he also not know that there was going to be a birth after that? Otherwise, why would he want to listen to the Buddha's teaching? Right? So there was the chance that he, after his time in the arupa world, he would descend from the arupa world into some other world, perhaps a sensual world, and maybe back into the four hells. There was the chance that that could happen. That is why he so wanted to listen to the Buddha, because he knew that his time in the arupa world was going to be limited, as long as it may be, but it would come to an end someday. And the only hope would be the Buddha's Dhamma, by which he could put an end to this painful rebirth cycle. But he realized that that was not going to happen, because he was going to be born in the arupa world when the Buddha would start to preach, and it would be too late for him. So does that also not say that he knew that he had a previous birth? I mean, if you have a birth after this and you believe in that, then surely you believe that you have a birth previous to this, right? It would be very weird otherwise. It's like, today's the day I start my life in samsara. How can everyone be saying that? So he believed in a birth prior to this, and he believed in a birth after the arupa world. So clearly, if there's one after the next, then there was one before this. So they knew about rebirth. That was not a new concept. And then Asita's son, so not Asita's son, but rather the son of one of the other Brahmins who had come for the naming ceremony, would go on to become one of the 5 ascetics to later spend time with the Bodhisattva in the time that he would engage in austere practices. This is Kondanya we speak of. So they were informed of this and advised to go and seek the Bodhisattva's counsel and to spend time with the Bodhisattva, so that eventually they would be able to spend time with the Buddha. So that was the advice and instruction given to their children. Do go and spend time with the Buddha, or as soon as he becomes a Buddha, and that will help you to realize what it is that we have failed to realize all this time. So if the ascetics who came to name the young prince knew about previous existence and the next and the existence after this, so rebirth, they were proficient in the Vedas, And in the Vedas, of course, they believe in rebirth and the concept of a soul that transcends from one birth to the next. So if they believed in this, then surely their children believed in the same. And later on, the Bodhisattva would also go and learn from Alara Kalama and Uddakarama, who were both very famous teachers back in the time. And so he, as in the Bodhisattva, knew very well that there was going to be a rebirth after this if he couldn't find a way to stop it. And there have been many births prior to this. So then he surely knew that in previous births he would have been an animal. Perhaps a deer that became prey to a beast and got torn up into pieces and devoured alive. So the Bodhisattva knew all this way before he became a Buddha. So then, with all this knowledge, right, and also the fact that he was probably a human before in many births, and on those occasions he fell ill, right? He lost his loved ones, and unfortunate circumstances befell his loved ones, right? So he knew all of this information. He had all this information way before he became Buddha. So in which case, then, when he goes on to preach the Four Noble Truths, for him to be saying, I have seen a suffering that I have never seen before. I have realized a suffering that I have never realized before. Idam dukkham pubbya ananussutesu dhammesu. We must understand that he speaks not of the suffering that comes through the suffering that comes with a normal day-to-day experience of life. So clearly, he was talking about something very different. And the cause of that suffering is attachment. Buddhist philosophy is to realize that suffering is the cause of that attachment, or rather, suffering is caused by that attachment. Buddhist philosophy is to realize that attachment leads to suffering. It's to realize it. Nothing to do. Now I want you to take this really carefully, because otherwise you might ask me, well, Swaminatha, all this time you've been asking us to do things like meditate and worship our parents and offer flowers, and now you're telling us that there's nothing to do? You are the one who told us that results are for the doers, right? If you do, you will get results and all this, and now you're telling us there's nothing to do? This is a very subtle point, and I want you to don't take it at face value, right? Don't think what you have understood is exactly as what Swaminatha is trying to explain here. Please take some time to contemplate on this. You have to do all the things you have been doing thus far, and you must continue to do them and try and do more of them. All the good things. Your meditations, your meritorious deeds, all that, you must continue with them and do more of them. But why must you do all of them? Think about that. You need to do all of them to help you realize the truth. See, think about this for a moment, right? I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to give me an answer. I have something to tell you. The moment I say I have something to tell you, what are you now ready to do? I'll ask the question again. I walk up to you and say, hello, I have something to tell you. The moment I say these words, what are you now ready to do? You're ready to listen to what I have to say, right? That's what you're ready to do. So your ears will point in my direction, and now you're ready to listen to what I have to say. And then I tell you, I tell you something, and that happens to be the truth. So before it's the truth, let's just say I now say what it is I want to say to you, right? And I've now told it to you. Now, all I've done is I've given you a bit of information. What is the thing that you can do now with that information I have given you? What's the first thing you can do with any information I give you? The first thing you can do with any information I give you. So first, when I say I've got something to tell you, you said, well, I hope you said, I want to listen to what you have to say. Okay, now you're listening and I'm speaking. And then I give you a piece of information about something. Like I say, the sun rises in the east. Right, so that's a bit of information. What is the first thing that you did the moment you heard those words? Some of you might say, well, there was a mental image. I had some mental imagery of the sun rising from the east. No, but before that, before all that mental imagery, well, before that, well, I heard what you said, and then yes, then what? Then you understood what I said, right? What if you hadn't understood what I said? If you didn't understand what I said, then what would you do? Frankly, you'd do nothing. Or you might ask in response, sorry, I don't understand. Can you say that again? Or can you please explain yourself? Is what you might say. You'll either ignore me, or you'll ask me to repeat it, or you might ask me to explain it. Now I've said something to you when you were ready to listen to me speak, and that is a new piece of information. The first thing you can do is understand it. Yes or no? The first thing you can do is understand what I have said, right? Now, I'll give you an example. Let's say you and I are at home, and I tell you, hey, there's the light in the next room. Someone's left it on. Do you mind? So I say that. The light is on in the next room. Someone's left it on. Do you mind? Okay, so, and imagine before I said that, I say, I've got something to tell you. Oh, that's why I say, hey, so to get your attention. So when I say hey or hi or I've got something to tell you, now you have directed your attention towards me. So that's the very first thing that needs to happen. Secondly, when I say there's a light on in the next room, someone's left it on, would you mind? Before you stand up from your seat and walk over to the next room to switch off the light, what is the one thing you do before that? Indeed, you understand what I have said. Because if you didn't understand what I say, if you didn't understand what I have said, then you wouldn't do anything. You'd remain put. You wouldn't move an inch. So I know from you standing up and walking over to the other room that you have understood what I have said. That's why people say after a few times, hey, don't you understand what I'm saying? Did you not understand what I just tell you? People we hear ask. That's when you have no response to what has just been said. So we can imply that you haven't understood. Right. So when I say there's a light on in the next room, before you stand up and walk over to the next room, one thing you've got to do is understand it. Yes? Are you all with me on this now? Right. So now with science or anything that is worldly, you have something to do after you have understood. With Buddhist philosophy, once you have understood, well, that's it. That is the objective of all this, to understand. So it makes little sense to ask then, once I've understood, what must I do? If you find yourself asking that question, then really the answer to that is you haven't understood yet. I'll give you a sort of a funny example. Think about this, right? Imagine someone's head is on fire. Okay, you see a guy, his head is on fire. And you say, hello? And he says, yes, your head's on fire? And then he says, okay, so what do you gather from what you just heard back from this person? He didn't understand what you said, surely. Because the moment you say someone's head is on fire, then there's only one thing they'd want to do. If they understand, if they have understood, if they have really understood what you have said, unless they of course want to burn alive, but if they have no intention of that, we're not talking about a madman, right? They would not in any circumstance want to burn themselves or cause any damage to themselves. So they want to be without any pain, right? So if you were to tell them your head's on fire, then before the time it takes to bat an eyelid, what would they do? They would try and find a way to put out that fire. You understand that? Right. So think about this then. When your mind is suffering, and it's because of attachment, what is the cause of attachment? What is the root of attachment? The root of attachment is always ignorance. What is ignorance? Ignorance is not knowing that attachment is the cause of suffering. I'm trying to show you something really, what's the word? I'm trying to show you something that's really interesting about this, really peculiar about this, and really something very powerful in this teaching. It's almost like saying you're suffering because you don't know you're suffering. I suppose a good analogy for this would be a dream. Right? Imagine in your dream, whenever you have bad dreams, right? So nightmare. So say you're dreaming and you see a massive elephant running behind you. And it's chasing you and you're running for your life. Now, if you've ever had a dream like that, If you haven't had a dream like that, you haven't lived. If you ever have a dream like that, and when you wake up from it, you know that mentally you felt as though that dream was very real. You know, aren't you glad that you woke up? After all, it was only a dream, so nothing could have physically happened to you. Right? The nearest elephant is 100 miles away from wherever you might be. But in your dream, because you didn't know it was a dream, that suffering was very real. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah? Because you don't know it's a dream, the suffering is very real. Now, what if in your dream you realize that it was a dream? Now, I know that for some people that happens, and there's a term for it which escapes me at this moment in time. It may come to me later. There's a technical term for it. It's when you're in a dream but you know you're dreaming. Right? So, what if in your dream you knew it was a dream, and now you have this elephant running behind you, or chasing you? Up until the moment you realized it was a dream, you felt fear. Right? You felt enormous amounts of fear because you thought the moment it catches up with you, it's going to crush you to death. So you felt tremendous amounts of fear. Only up until the moment you realized that you were in a dream. However, imagine somehow you got to know that you're in a dream. How are you going to feel from that point forward? Now, I can tell you from my experience, there's been one time in my life where it has happened, where I knew I was in a dream. And normally when that happens, you wake up immediately afterwards, don't you? Usually when you know you're in a dream, the very next moment you wake up. And sometimes it's quite a disappointment that you had to wake up, but other times you're glad you woke up. Because the thing is, the fear of something untoward that's happening, it seems very real. Your heart is pounding away, and you're sweating, and sometimes people even scream. I mean, why would they scream if they knew it was a dream? No one screams for the fun of it. And sometimes, you scream so loud that your scream wakes you up. And then you wake up, and then now you're totally embarrassed. Does that never happen to you? And everyone around you is like, what happened? No, nothing happens, just cough. Because you're just so embarrassed. So you wouldn't have screamed had you known it was a dream. But you don't, if it was in real life situation, an elephant comes running behind you and you scream, now you're not embarrassed. But you're embarrassed to have screamed in a dream, because you know that this is all fake, this is all nonsensical, didn't happen at all, but the fear of it was so real. Right? So you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure most of you would have had a dream where something, a nightmare, you had a nightmare, and then you got woken up and you had a fast beating heart and sweaty, and you almost screamed, and sometimes you wet the sheets. But sometimes some dreams can be so intense, so real and so intense at the same time. Now, imagine in your dream, as I said, it has happened to me once in my dream. I'll tell you what I did. So in my dream, we were surrounded by we were even in some place, like in some house. All houses feel like it's your home. That's the way it goes in dreams, right? Whatever house you're in, that's home. but each house is different. The problem is you don't know it's a dream, so you don't know that you've had dreams previous to this. So I was in a house somewhere, and I felt that was my home, and we were surrounded by some gangmen, and they had guns with them. So they were shouting for us to come out, and they had us at gunpoint. So they were asking for our valuables, and of course I was feeling very scared at the time in my dream, and then somehow I realized I was in a dream. So I realized I was in a dream, and all this time I had my arms up in my dream, and I was pretty scared, right? And I was saying, no, please don't shoot me. I'll give you anything you want. And I remember this dream very vividly, because I think because I realized I was in a dream. And then the moment it dawned on me that I was in a dream, I put my arms down. And then I in fact told the guy, I know I'm dreaming, so do whatever you want. Only to my disappointment, about 10 to 15 seconds, I think 10 seconds later, I woke up. Otherwise, I would have really had some fun. Ten seconds later, or even what felt like 10 seconds, I think it would have probably been shorter than that, I woke up. Now, why am I talking about my dream? I'm talking to you about my dream because I'm trying to draw a reference here. Excuse me. I'm trying to draw an analogy to the suffering that I was talking about earlier, and why it's so important for us to realize that that attachment is rooted in ignorance. It is so powerful just to realize that attachment is rooted in ignorance. Because then, if you can really get your head around this, folks, any one of you who feels that Nibbana is never something I'm going to be able to do, this is just so impossible, I want to lighten your load. If you realize what I'm trying to explain to you here, I'm sure none of you would come with an excuse, or none of you would come up to me and say, Swaminathan, Nibbana is just so difficult, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it this lifetime. Because it may be that you feel this way. It may be that you feel this way because you feel there's a lot to do within air quotes. There's a lot to do. Yes, there is all those meritorious deeds to do, right? I'm not saying any of that is not important. All of that is super important. Right? The offering the flowers, the incense, the Buddha chanting, right? The meditations, the alms givings, right? All of that is very important. So don't you be stopping any of those things. What I'm trying to explain to you here, that all of those things, the reason you're engaging in merits is for you to understand that attachment is the cause of suffering, and that suffering is caused by attachment. In other words, to look at it from both sides. Right? So imagine two people looking at each other. Right? You can have one perspective, which is man A looking at man B, and then man B looking at man A. Right? Either way, you're looking at the situation. So it's just a different reference point. So it's to understand that attachment leads to suffering, and to understand that suffering is caused by attachment. If you understand one, you understand the other. I mean, it's the same concept. But merit is what will help you to understand this. In other words, to shed your ignorance. I'm trying my best to explain this concept to you, and I don't know successful I'm here. I'm trying to get this across to you. Because I can't see you nodding, either in approval or disapproval. And I'm hoping you can understand what I'm trying to say here. And the reason I'm saying this to you is because if you get your head around this, you will feel that, excuse me, you will most certainly feel that Nibbana is doable. Because after all, it's all a realization. That is all you need to do, realize. It's not like once you've realized, now you need to do something else also after that. Right? You don't need to go please someone. Right? You don't need to go do all sorts of, wonderful and weird and wonderful things. You don't need to do any of those things. All you need is to realize. So why are we doing these meritorious deeds? That is to realize. Let me try and put it this way. Offering no amount of flowers is going to help you rid the mind of attachment. The mind can only be rid of attachment by understanding / realizing that attachment causes suffering. That is the only thing that will eradicate attachment. What is the only thing that would eradicate attachment or cease attachment? Realizing that attachment leads to suffering. That is not done by offering flowers. So why do we offer flowers? Offering flowers will help you to understand that. Offering flowers will give you the power of wisdom. It is your power of wisdom which will help you to understand that attachment causes suffering. So it's kind of like, if you take the example of offering flowers, as I'm just taking one meritorious deed here, there are plenty. Offering flowers replaces your ignorance with wisdom. And wisdom is knowledge that attachment causes suffering. The moment you have that wisdom, attachment ceases. This is a subtle but a very important point. That's why I'm trying my best to get this across to you. And if you get your head around this, you will begin to realize, or you will really feel that Nibbana is achievable. Throughout this year, I want you to feel that. I want you to really believe that. Nibbana is achievable. Nibbana is most certainly doable. It's doable because there's nothing to do. So is there nothing to do? No, there is something to do. And that is to realize. But nothing else to do. So what about the offering flowers? Offering flowers is to help you realize. Realize what? That attachment is what causes suffering. Because the moment you realize that attachment causes suffering, attachment ceases. And when attachment ceases, suffering ceases. So the only thing you did was actually realize. A popular example at our monastery, not an example, but again an analogy at our monastery, is imagine I think I mentioned this before to you. You're sat under a tree, say a coconut tree, okay? And there's someone a few yards ahead in front of you, and they're looking at you, and they look up the tree, and they can see there's a coconut falling from the tree. It's coming down fast, and if you don't do anything, it's going to come down on your head. Now, this man says, so he shouts out to you and he says, hey, look up. There's a coconut falling onto your head. Now, what you do as soon as you hear this is you look up. The moment you look up, the coconut disappears. So the moment you look up, as you're looking up, you're asking him, what coconut? And then if you look back down again at him or something else, he says, there, it's there. See, it's coming down fast. And then you look back up again. What coconut? Because the moment you look up, the coconut's gone. Suffering is like that coconut. You see, this is what I'm trying to get across to you, right? There's nothing to do here. Now, that man, he looked up, and what else did he do to escape the falling coconut? Did he get up and walk out of the way? Did he go and sit on the other side of the tree? Did he chop down the tree? Did he hold a bucket over his head to catch the falling coconut? No, he did absolutely nothing. Did he do nothing though? No, he did something. What was that thing he did? He realized. He looked up and he looked up to see the coconut. The moment his eyes see the coconut vanishes. So much so that it would be difficult for us to even say that he actually saw the coconut. But he did. Not he didn't. And he didn't at the same time. Because the moment his eyes meet the coconut vanishes. And I'm talking about suffering in that aspect. So this analogy is to help you understand suffering. Again, what is the cause of suffering? Let's get our head straight here. There's no reason for any doubt or confusion here. Attachment is the cause of suffering. One might ask, but hang on a second, Swaminathan. Why didn't the Buddha say ignorance was the cause of attachment? Or rather, ignorance was the cause of suffering? Surely, if attachment is the cause of suffering and ignorance is the cause of attachment, then why did he make an extra stop at attachment? Why didn't he just say ignorance was the cause of suffering? He could have made it so much simpler, and then we wouldn't even need to talk about attachment. That's one more thing we need to try and get our heads around now. Why did he not just take us straight from suffering to ignorance? Some of you might have felt this way. Some of you might have been curious. For some of you, this question may have come into your mind. Okay, let's say the Buddha did in fact claim that suffering is caused by ignorance. Okay, let's imagine that is what the suttas say. That is what his teachings say. Monks, I proclaim that suffering is caused by ignorance. Ignorance. Okay, and now the monks ask in return, okay, Buddha, what is ignorance? Ignorance of what? Because when you're ignorant, right, you've got to be ignorant of something. You're ignorant of the truth. That is what you're ignorant of, right? You have to be ignorant of something. I mean, you can't be just ignorant. Ignorant of what? That's like saying, I've got. You can't just say, I've got, and someone asks, you've got what? Likewise, you can't just say, I'm ignorant. You have to say, you're ignorant of what? Now, of course, you can be ignorant of ignorance. In other words, you don't know what you're ignorant of. That's when you are destitute. Or hopeless. We've spoken of hopeless and helpless in the past. There's a difference between these two terms. Helpless is when you know what the problem is and you know you need help. But help is just not available. That's when you cry for help, right? People fall into all sorts of problems. They help. Please help me. I need to get out of this. Please help me. Is there anyone there to help me? Please help me. So imagine you're in a pit and you say, please help me. You want someone to come and help you out of it. But imagine you're in a pit and you're blind. Now why would you ask for help? You're in a pit, you're blind, so you don't even know you're in a pit. That's when you're hopeless. There is absolutely no hope. Helpless is when you have hope. You have hope, right? That's why you're asking for help. That's why you're calling for help. In the hope that someone is going to come and help you. So you have hope, you just don't have help yet. So you move from hopeless to helpless to someone being there to help you. And then you have been helped. And then you can help someone else. That's the way it works. So going back to the point before, imagine the Buddha had said that suffering is caused by ignorance. I know I, of all people, would be the first to ask, ignorance of what? Now what might the Buddha have to say in reply to this question? Ignorance of what? Because if it is the ignorance of something that leads me to suffer, ignorance of what is it that leads me to suffer? Are you beginning to understand why the Buddha did not say that ignorance is the cause of suffering? Okay, now imagine you know about attachment. Okay? You know of attachment and how attachment leads to suffering and all that, but the Buddha didn't talk about it in his sutta. So say there's a third person, they read a sutta somewhere from the Tripitaka, and in which it says, it doesn't really, but I'm just saying for the argument and help you to understand this. Imagine in the Tripitaka they read that ignorance is the cause of suffering. But you know that in this sutta, part of it disappeared, part of it got destroyed, right? So the Buddha's word over the time, over a period of time, that the middle part got disappeared. It's disappeared now, and now they come up to you and say, "I've just learned something today," and you say, "What?" And he says, "I've just realized that ignorance is the cause of suffering." Now you know that they haven't got it really, because ignorance is not the cause of suffering. So you ask then, ignorance of what causes suffering? They're going to be stumped. They'll just say, ignorance. Yeah, but ignorance of what? Because after all, what is ignorance? Ignorance is you not knowing something. Right? Ignorance is you not knowing something. So, not knowing is the cause of suffering. Not knowing what is the cause of suffering. Oh, you get the idea. Not knowing what is the cause of suffering. Now they're going to be stumped. But when you say attachment causes suffering, not knowing that attachment causes suffering causes you to attach and therefore causes suffering. What might the response be then? That's going to be the response. Does that make sense to you all, folks? I'm not just saying this for the sake of a technicality, right? I'm not just trying to prove a point here that you got to understand ignorance, you got to understand attachment, you got to understand suffering, and how the three terms are, connected to each other. That's not the only purpose of me trying to explain this to you. I'm trying to help you realize here that Nibbana is most certainly doable. It is so doable. Why? Because all you need to do is realize. Realize what? That attachment leads to suffering. The mind only attaches because it doesn't know that attachment leads to suffering. There's no other reason. The mind doesn't attach because it's a Wednesday. No, it doesn't. The mind doesn't attach because it looks like it's going to rain in a bit. No. That's not why the mind attaches. The mind doesn't attach because a crow just flew over its head. No, that's not why the mind attaches. There's only one reason why the mind attaches. And that is because the mind doesn't know that attachment leads to suffering. That's why I like to think of the mind as being an idiot, not a fool. Do you know the difference? An idiot is a born fool. So a fool, he was always a fool. As in, he doesn't know that there's a problem. The mind is an idiot, not a fool. Because if you were to explain to the mind, if the mind were to understand X is the cause of suffering, the mind at no cost spared would continue to engage in X. No way. If the mind can be shown with facts that X leads to suffering, assume X is an activity, the mind at no cost spared would do X. He would not do X no matter at whose call, whose command. That's it. The mind would not do X. Because the mind does not do something that leads itself to suffer. It's almost like the mind is suffering proof. Like how you have air proof and waterproof. The moment you show the mind, this is what causes suffering. That very moment, the mind will immediately drop whatever that thing is that causes suffering. Now I know, so for those of you who have understood this bit, you'll have another question that will start to linger in the back of your minds alongside this. And that question is, hang on, Swaminathan, then, doesn't the Sotapanna know this? Doesn't the Sotapanna know that it's attachment that causes suffering? And if that's the case, then how come they continue to suffer? That's a very good question. What's the answer? I'm so tempted to give that to you as a homework. Actually, shall I? I feel like giving that to you as a piece of homework. So let's phrase the question again. Right, now we know that suffering is not caused by ignorance. No. Suffering is caused by attachment. The cause of suffering has, is, and always will be attachment. Never ignorance. Because ignorance is not something that the mind does, but attachment is something that the mind does. What does the mind do? Attach. That's what the mind does. Attach. But ignorance is not something that the mind does. Ignorance is a state of mind. It's a knowledge, it's an information. Knowing that fire is hot, you have a choice. You can either stick your finger in it, hot as in knowing that a fire will burn you, you can do one of two things. You can either stick your finger in it and get burned, or you can not stick your finger in and then not get burned. That's the action, right? The action of either putting your finger in there or not putting your finger in there. One's a doing thing, one's a non-doing thing. But that information, that knowledge that sticking your finger in the fire is going to burn you, is that an action? No, that's a knowledge. Why does a young kid stick its finger in the fire, in the candle? It's because he knows, or she knows, that it's going to burn him. Really? I was just checking if you're paying attention. That's because he doesn't know that sticking the finger in the fire is going to burn him. One day you learned this. Sometimes the easy way, sometimes the hard way. One day you learned this. Ever since you learned this, have you ever stuck your finger in the fire? Unless you wanted to get burned. Now, remember, it's a very important point here, folks. If you want to get burned, of course, there's no other way to get burned other than sticking your finger in the fire. That is also knowledge. That is also knowledge. Imagine, you really want to get burned. And you didn't know that fire could burn. What a pitiful life you'd have to live from there on. You want to get burned, but there doesn't seem to be any way to get burned. That guy walks up to you with a burned finger, and you'll be begging at his feet, please, 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 tell me how to get burned. Because you're ignorant. Ignorance is simply ignorance of knowledge, the truth. You can either use it to save yourself or you can use it to destroy yourself. But here's the thing. Where the mind is concerned, the mind does not attach, knowing that attachment leads to suffering. That the mind does not do. While you may want to go and stick your finger in the fire, wanting to get burned, the mind does not do that. There's a very subtle reason for that. But I'm not going to talk about that today, because if I also expose that aspect, then that might totally confuse you. It might not. I don't think it'll confuse you, but it'll give you too much to bite. For those of you who like to think about it, I'll mention it very briefly. Right? You sticking your finger in the fire to get burned is really the mind wanting to get burned. So the mind would suffer if it didn't get burnt. So really, what brings happiness to the mind right now is getting burned. That's why the mind sends a signal to the finger: stick your finger in the fire. That's the reason. I'm not going to repeat that. We'll talk about it on another occasion. But because the mind can seek happiness, either, it just depends on what the drishti, or what the perspective is, right? What the indoctrination is. What ditti it holds. Whatever it believes is pleasurable, the mind will do for the purpose of happiness. So if the mind believes that sticking my finger in the fire is what brings me happiness, then that is what the mind wants. So the moment the mind is shown some X is going to bring you happiness, the mind will do that. And if on another occasion the mind is shown that not sticking your finger in the fire is what brings you happiness, then the mind will immediately withdraw. Either way you look at it, the mind is only doing what it needs to do to keep itself happy. Right? So think through that again. I have to make sure you understand the question, right? At least. Otherwise, how are you going to work on the answer? So let's make sure we understand the question. What we first wanted to understand, what we first tried to understand, was why the Buddha did not claim that ignorance is the cause of suffering. Is that bit clear to you now? Let's double check. We confirmed our understanding by assuming, or by imagining, the Buddha actually saying that ignorance is the cause of suffering. We just imagined, right? That was our hypothesis. Let's just imagine that the Buddha somehow claimed that ignorance is the cause of suffering. Had he done so, and we know that ignorance is the lack of knowledge, that is what ignorance is. Not knowing, or the lack of knowledge. Someone comes up to you and says, not knowing leads me to suffering. You'd have to be blind as a brick wall to not ask the question, or you'd have to be dumb to not ask the question, not knowing what leads to suffering. Having no knowledge of what leads to suffering. Otherwise that sentence is incomplete. You get that, right? I don't know, that's why I'm suffering. Try that for size. I don't know, that's why I'm suffering. You don't know what? Surely you'd ask that question. I don't know what. You don't know what, because of which you're suffering. What is it you don't know because of which you're suffering? The answer to that is, you don't know that attachment causes suffering. That is why you're suffering. If you knew that attachment causes suffering, you wouldn't attach. If you knew that attachment caused suffering, you wouldn't attach. That is why the Buddha says, ignorance is the root of attachment. Ignorance is the cause of attachment, not suffering. Ignorance is not the cause of suffering. Ignorance is the cause of attachment, and attachment is the cause of suffering. So what is ignorance? Ignorance is not knowing that attachment causes suffering. How is that of any use to us? Well, if the mind knew that attachment causes suffering, the mind wouldn't attach. If the mind knew that attachment causes suffering, the mind wouldn't attach. So what is realization then? Realization is essentially realizing that attachment causes suffering. Now go back to the Four Noble Truths. Let's go back to the Four Noble Truths. I have realized that this is suffering, which is short for Idan Dukkam, Pubbyananu Sudesu Dhammesu, Chakkam Udapadi, Jnanam Udapadi, and so on and so forth. I have realized that this is suffering. Then he went on to say, I have realized that this is the cause of suffering. Do you see how all this connects together? I have realized, okay, I have realized, which means I have come out of ignorance. That's what it means. That's why he says, Vidya Udapadi. Avidya replaced with Vidya. Vidya Udapadi, or Vijja Udapadi. Jnanam Udapadi. Panya Udapadi. Vidya Udapadi, what has that Vidya brought you? You could ask the Buddha, Buddha, what has the Vidya brought you? What has this knowledge brought you? Well, so far, up until now, I did not know that attachment caused suffering. Now I know that. Simply moving from not knowing that attachment causes suffering to knowing that attachment causes suffering, that transformation is Vidya Udapadi. That in itself is coming out of ignorance. Now the most beautiful thing here is, the moment you come out of ignorance that attachment causes suffering, the moment you come out of that ignorance, attachment ceases. Just like that coconut falling from the tree, the moment you look up to see the coconut, the moment your eyes meet with that coconut, or meet with the sight of that coconut, if your eyes met with the coconut, it would be too late. The moment your eyes meet with the sight of the coconut, no more coconut. The coconut has disappeared. So the moment you realize, and that is what realization is, that is the core of Buddhist philosophy, folks. I'm trying to show you how you can focus your practice. Right? In future sermons, I want to take you further into this, into the Four Noble Truths. After all, that is what Buddhism is all for, the Four Noble Truths. The entirety of Buddhist philosophy is engrossed within, encapsulated within the Four Noble Truths. Hence, his maiden sermon. I would even go as far as saying that every sermon after the Four Noble Truths was preached was to detail and further explain and outline and describe the very first sermon. I'd even say that everything else that the Buddha preached was to detail and describe and explain and illustrate the very first sermon that he delivered. It has all of Buddhism within it, all of it. At least Buddhist philosophy. So I want us now to start to focus in that area, in that space. We've been building up to this. Unbeknown to you, I've always had an agenda. This plot has a twist. Don't you just hate a person with an ulterior motive? In this case, I think you're grateful. That if I started to preach to you the Four Noble Truths right from the very start, in its core, you probably would have lost interest. But we've been building up to this, and we need to now start to focus on this. Now, this is like, as I said, all of Buddhist philosophy is centered on the Four Noble Truths. So it is from the Four Noble Truths that the rest of it expands and grows and grows arms and legs. And it's like a network then from there on. So if we started to explore Buddhist philosophy from its outskirts, right, then we have to slowly make our way inwards. Now, how do you get to the root of a tree? If you look at the tree from afar, say you looked at it from top, right? Then you see this vast. You see the foliage, the branches spread about, and the leaves, right? You can't see the root from above. I'm talking about a huge tree, a massive tree. All you can see is probably the green, and then you come and land on a leaf. Now you have to make your way from the leaf to the root. How do you do that? From the leaf, you move on to the smaller branches, little twigs, and then you move on from the smaller branches to the bigger branches, from the bigger branches to even bigger branches, from the even bigger branches to the even bigger branches, on and on and on and on and on, until you get to the stem of the tree or the bark, and then you work your way down to the root. Right? So we may have started from the leaves, and now what I'm telling you is we can see the root from here. We've got that far. We've gotten so close. So now I want you to start focusing on the Four Noble Truths, because there is a reason why the Buddha preaches the Four Noble Truths as his very first sermon. That was not potluck. It was not like he came and sat down at Isipadan and thought, let me see, I'd like to preach. Any requests from the audience? And I don't think when he first reached the first sermon, he took any questions. I doubt he sat down and asked the 5 ascetics, right, tell me, do you have any questions? I doubt he did that. Because to have questions, you need to know what you're asking questions about. Like when, for instance, your math teacher teaches you a brand new lesson, they don't start with questions. First he says, shut up and listen to me, and then later on you can ask me questions. Because how can you ask questions about something you don't even understand? So, likewise, you must understand now the reason why the Buddha does not claim that ignorance is the cause of suffering, because it is not the cause of suffering. In fact, if you were to think that ignorance is the cause of suffering, yet again you're ignorant. To think that ignorance is the cause of suffering is ignorance. Why? What did we say ignorance was? Not knowing that attachment is the cause of suffering. So what if someone thinks that, oh, well, actually ignorance is the cause of attachment, so surely ignorance is the cause of suffering? Again, you're ignorant. That is also ignorance. To think that anything other than attachment is the cause of ignorance, to think that anything other than attachment is the cause of suffering is ignorance. So don't try to one-up the Buddha. He's the Buddha, you know. He is the fountain of knowledge, you know. He discovered the Four Noble Truths, you know. So he knows it best. Not even the great elder Sariputta knows the Four Noble Truths like the Buddha does. So let's not try and circumvent what the Buddha taught and try and find shortcuts. You may feel like doing it, but I'm just trying to show you that that is not the way to go about it. I'm going to go as far as saying, to think that anything other than attachment is the cause of suffering is ignorance. Even if you were to think that ignorance is the cause of suffering, that is also yet again ignorance. Because after all, ignorance is not knowing what causes suffering. No, it's not knowing that this is suffering. It's not knowing that this is the cause of suffering. It's not knowing that ceasing this puts an end to suffering, ceases suffering. And it's not knowing the path to the cessation of suffering. Okay? The Buddha goes on to ask, Katama Chao, sorry, not the Buddha, in the Satchavibhanga Sutta. Katama Chao Avijja. The great elder Sariputta, in his analysis of the Four Noble Truths, he asks the question, what is ignorance? See, here you can find the perfect answer for this question. The most eloquent answer for this question. What is ignorance? And he goes on to say, Dukkhe Ajnana. Ignorance of suffering. Or rather, so if we take avidya to be ignorance and ajnana to be lack of knowledge or lack of wisdom, okay, lack of knowledge, let's keep it simple, lack of knowledge. Dukkhe ajnana, lack of knowledge about what? Lack of knowledge about suffering. Dukkha samudaya ajnana, lack of knowledge about the cause of suffering. Dukkha nirodha ajnana. Lack of knowledge about the cessation of suffering. Dukkha nirodha gaminiya patipadaya ajnana. Lack of knowledge about the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. This is ignorance. Now again, why are we so focused on what ignorance is? Why does it matter? Why are we concerned about what ignorance is? Because it is ignorance that causes the mind to attach. That is why. The mind attaches because the mind does not understand suffering. The mind attaches because the mind does not understand that attachment leads to suffering. The mind does not try to free itself from suffering because the mind does not know that cessation of attachment is a cessation of suffering. And the mind does not engage in the path to cessation of suffering because the mind does not understand that there is a path to the cessation of suffering. The mind has not seen this. That is the only reason. It is not the above and the fact that today is a Sunday. No. It is not the above and the fact that you had spaghetti for dinner last night. No. There is no other reason. So you don't need to understand this and also change the day of the week. You don't need to understand this and change your eating habits. You don't need to understand this and also stop smoking. Disclaimer, we don't condone smoking. But has nothing to do with suffering, the mental suffering. Smoking does not lead to mental cancer. It may lead to oral cancer, not mental cancer. The only cause of mental cancer is attachment. Ignorance is simply the lack of knowledge about this. So you see, why am I emphasizing this again and again and again? It's because all you gotta do is realize this. The moment the mind has seen that I am suffering because I don't know suffering. I am suffering because I don't know that attachment leads to suffering. The moment the mind realizes this, the mind no longer attaches. The moment you know that fire burns, you did not put your finger in the fire unless you wanted to get burned. You did not put your finger in the fire not knowing what was going to happen. Did you? As an adult, the only time you would have put your finger in the fire is either by mistake or if you really wanted to get yourself burnt. You would not have put your finger in the fire not knowing what's going to happen. Come on. Because as a child you did that. Why? Because you did not know. That was not a mistake, remember? That was not a mistake. I mean, it's a mistake from the perspective of an adult. Because it burned and the child did not know what was going to happen. But the child wanted to find out what would happen. So really, burning was not a mistake. The child, he got what he wanted, what he asked for. Really, the child wanted to know what would happen if I stuck my finger in the fire. Did he not find an answer to that question? So is it not mission accomplished? Imagine the child does not want to get burnt. If the child does not know that this is a fire and that it burns, why would the child even consider the concept of burning as it sticks its finger in the fire? Why would the idea, the notion of burning even come into his mind as he sees a fire and sticks his finger in it? Why would he? If he doesn't know that fire burns, let's say he got burned somehow, right? Say in his sleep, his elder brother like elder brothers do. He came and stuck a lighter, lit the lighter and held it to his finger. And then the moment it started to hurt him, the baby started to cry, and the elder brother ran away. Right? So the child woke up and he looked at his finger, and obviously it was burned, but the child did not know what had happened. He does not know what being burnt is, and all he knows is it hurt. That's all he knows. It hurt. How it hurt, he doesn't know. Because when he woke up, the brother wasn't there. When he woke up, the fire wasn't there. The lighter wasn't there. And imagine it hasn't left any marks either on the finger. It was just for a very flash moment, the flame was held to the finger, and the moment the baby woke up, it's gone. So does the baby now learn? Does the child now learn that it is fire that burnt him? No. So next time he sees fire, is there any reason for him to think about burning or even being hurt? Any reason? None whatsoever. None whatsoever. Because still he's yet to connect this knowledge that sticking my finger in the fire is going to burn. That knowledge is still new to him, or still foreign to him. That knowledge has yet to come to him. But now if he sees the fire and sticks his finger in the fire, the reason he's doing this is because he wants to know what might happen, not whether it's going to burn him. I hope you understand what I'm trying to get across to you here. The child who does not understand what a fire can do does not stick his finger in the fire to see if it burns him. Does he? All he wants to know is, what is this? What does it do if I stick my finger in it? And then the first time he gets that experience, now he knows, ouch, that hurt. Now he knows what being burnt feels like. Then he starts to cry, and then mother comes running and says, oh, little one, did you get yourself burnt? Oh, all right, okay, so that is being burnt, right, I see. Now he has knowledge. Now, aloko udapati. Next time he sees fire, there are only two ways. Next time he sees fire, he's going to stick his finger in it. Before that, there were three ways. What was the first way? Actually, no, before that, there was only one way. What was that only one way? What is this? What might it do to me? That was the only way. Could he have stuck his finger in to see if it burns him? No, because he does not know that fire burns. Could he have done it by mistake? Well, I suppose he could have done it by mistake. As in, he doesn't know what's going on and he doesn't put it, but it just happens. Right? So it could have been one of two ways there. But now, this time round, he knows that this is fire. He doesn't stick his finger in the fire trying to find out what is this and what might it do to me. No way. Because now he knows this is fire and that it burns. So there are only one of two ways this could happen. One, by mistake. Two, he wants to burn himself. Does that make sense to all of you? No. Before he was ignorant, but later, now he is knowledgeable. He is wise. He has been enlightened. He has become enlightened. He has become enlightened to the power of fire. What fire can do. Now he knows. Knowing this does not stop him. Knowing this, he can still stick his finger in it, or he can avoid sticking his finger in it. Now when the mind is informed that attachment leads to suffering, the mind will no longer attach. That's why when the great elder Sariputta asks, Katama chauso avijja, dukkhe ajnana, dukkha samudaya ajnana. What is dukkha samudaya? Arya satya? Yo tassaya tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho. Or rather, yan loke priyarupang satarupang ettesa tanha uppajjamana uppajjati ette nivisamana nivisati. When something is sensed as being pleasant and pleasurable, there in the mind attachment arises, there in the mind attachment resides. Right? So ignorance of that, meaning having no knowledge of that, is ignorance. So does that not show us then, the moment the mind realizes that attachment causes suffering, the mind will no longer attach. So what does this show us? What does this teach us? What does this help us understand? That Nibbana is most certainly doable. That's what it helps us understand. That is the long and the short of it. Because really, there is nothing to do. There is nothing to do as such. The only thing to do is realize. The only thing to do is to come to Samma Ditti. Samma Sankappa follows. Samma Vacha follows. Samma Kammanta follows. Samma Ajiva follows. Samma Vayama follows. Samma Sati follows. Samma Samadhi follows. And then eventually Samma Jnana follows and Samma Vimukti follows. You don't have to do anything to walk the Noble Eightfold Path. There is nothing to do. That's why you'll have heard of the Ogatharna Sutta. The Buddha is asked, Venerable Sir, what is it you did to cross the Oga, which is the river, the stream, or the river? What did you do to cross the stream? I neither swam nor stayed put. Isn't that the kind of answer which would in return warrant, you what? Say that again? Yes, I neither swam nor stayed put. What does he mean by I didn't swim? What he means is I didn't do anything. So what does it mean by I stayed put? Oh, I didn't stay put. So I neither swam nor stayed put, right? So if I didn't swam, meaning I didn't do anything. So what about the I didn't stay put? I did not do anything either. Okay, what did you do then? What I did was, I realized. I realized. So that was asked by a Deva, if I remember correctly. And then later on, you'll remember Alavaka, the demon, asks the Buddha, how does one cross the stream? And the Buddha replies, Saddhaya tarati yoga. It is through conviction that one crosses the stream. Now, what is conviction? Conviction is realization. The level to which you have conviction is the level to which you have realized. The more you have realized, the more you have conviction. I mean, what is conviction after all? If you look it up in the dictionary, it'll say something like understanding of of reality, of the truth, of the way it is, not because someone else said so, or not because it's written somewhere. This is something. Really, the word for that is realization. Realizing the truth. That is what conviction is. Because once you have realized, now you don't need to rely on someone else. Now you don't believe it through faith on someone else or someone or something else. When you have conviction, that is belief based on a realization. That is why I say conviction is realization. Realization what? Of what? Realization that this is suffering. A realization that this is the cause of suffering. Realization that the cessation of the cause of suffering. And realization this is the path, the cessation of suffering. Is this beautiful or is this beautiful? Which one? Did you understand that? What we've discussed there. Please understand, I'm not trying to make a technical discussion here. I'm not trying to make this overly technical for the sake of it. This may sound a little bit technical, but all I'm trying to do really is to talk to your wisdom. Talk to the wisdom in your mind and to help you realize one thing. And that one thing is, Nibbana is so doable because there's nothing you have to do. That's why. I know that sounds like a riddle. It's not. Nibbana is so doable because there's nothing to do. You will be saying that if you haven't followed what I've tried to explain in the sermon. Go back and listen to it. Nibbana is so doable because there's nothing to do. You don't need to jump up and down. You don't need to run around the lap. You don't need to go to work. You don't need to study. You don't need to do anything. You don't even need to meditate. I know that sounds so awful. Because what I don't want you to do now is to go and stop meditating. What must you do then? Realize. How do you realize? How do you realize? One, you need lots of merit. You need tons of merit. Tons and tons of merit. Because that clears the path to realization. And then you need contemplation. You need to contemplate. Your merits will help you to realize, to contemplate, to reflect. You need to pay attention. You can understand this if you have been listening to this carefully. You can understand this. Well, one might say, Swaminas, I listened to it very, very, very carefully, and 3 times over, and I still haven't got it. Fair enough. Maybe do a little bit more merit and try and listen to it again. One day I'll show it to you, I'll explain to you, and I'll prove to you that really it's not you that's trying to understand this. Because where is that you trying to understand it? Where's the you trying to understand it? Where's the I? Where's the me trying to understand this? There is an understanding, yes, that's there, and understanding is happening. And understanding is happening. So it's a process. Understanding is a process, a mental process. Seeing, smelling, hearing, feeling, thinking, these are all mental processes. But there is no need for a I am understanding. There's no need for a you are understanding. That we'll talk about later. But for the time, for today, right, for next week, I want you to try and get your head around this sermon. And of course, there's the homework. So what is the homework again? Now, if you understood the first, the premise that we have been trying to talk around and the foundation that I've tried to help lay down for you, the question that you might have, and you most likely would have posed to me if you were in the vicinity, would be, well, Swami Nuhansa, you're saying that, so it's realization that we need. Hasn't a Sotapanna realized? Hasn't a Sotapanna realized? Isn't that what a Sotapanna is? Isn't that how one becomes a Sotapanna? By realizing? So how come there's still suffering then? If, as you say, realizing that attachment is the cause of suffering is all one needs to do to rid themselves of attachment. And the moment you rid yourself of attachment, then you have rid yourself of suffering. Then hasn't a Sotapanna realized that attachment is the cause of suffering? By very token of which, shouldn't they also then rid themselves of suffering? Or rid themselves of attachment initially, and then by the very token of which they should rid themselves of suffering? Shouldn't that not happen for a Sotapanna? The answer to that question from me is, that's your homework. I like your question, I'm going to like your answer even better. Now, I'm not necessarily asking for you all to type your answer out and send it to me. Particularly given this is the Dhamma, it's very difficult to convey ideas in words. Don't you feel that? I'm the worst culprit. Right? Being able to express ideas in words, because again, we are trying to explain something that is supramundane using a language that was used and developed to explain mundane things. Yeah? So, but your homework is going to be to explain it to yourself. Try and think along what we have talked about here. I'll give you a hint. A Sotapanna is not an Arahant. Why? I shouldn't say any more. Otherwise, I'm doing your homework for you. The reason I'm setting you this homework, because as you think through this, you will develop your wisdom faculty. And perhaps to answer this question, you may need to go back and listen to the sermon again. Even if you don't answer the question, listen to the sermon again. It's only going to do you a great deal of good. Okay? So, I want you to try and work that out for the following week. It's something interesting. I'm sure it will be. Right? Go back and listen to the sermon just to get your head around this if you need to, a couple of times. And I'll say this one last time before we wrap up. The reason I have tried to explain this to you is not for this to be a very technical discussion of, it's A leads to B, B leads to C, so therefore it's not A that leads to C. It's not for that purpose. It's not to make it a technical discussion. It is to help you realize, understand, and feel confident that Nibbana is so doable. It is so doable. Because there's no heavy lifting to do here. There's no manual labor. There's no standing on one foot. There are no hardships to go through. Is Nibbana easy or difficult? It's not even a valid question. Nibbana is realization. That is the answer. Nibbana is realization. Realize. Must we do merits? 100%. As much as you possibly can. And then what else? Realize. What must I do to realize? Listen, bear, contemplate. Sunata, dhareta, charata, dhamme. That is how you realize. So, Sunata, you've already done once, and I'm inviting you to do it a couple of times. Dhareta, of course, you're going to have to remember parts of this. Otherwise, how would you contemplate? Charata, begin your contemplation. Now, this sermon has been a little theoretical, I understand. But a bit of theory every now and then is not a bad idea. And I know some of you like a bit of theory, right? So I want you to understand this concept. So this is a concept, yes, it's a conceptual thing, but it's a very real thing, and this is the Four Noble Truths. There is nothing more real than the Four Noble Truths. But it is a concept nevertheless. It is practical in every way. It may be that you don't see the practicality here because I haven't used examples. Well, not like we do on other days. I have used the finger in the flame example and various others. But that is again to explain the theory, right? So it is not entirely not impractical, but there is some practical elements in there. But it has been somewhat theoretical, I would admit. But anyway, that's your homework. So come up with an answer, not come back to me with an answer. Come up with an answer as to what about a Sotapanna? If it is realization that leads one to rid the mind of attachment, then isn't a Sotapanna someone who has realized? Then how come they still suffer? At least for 7 bhava, there is suffering left, right? So how does that work? I'll leave you to work that out. At the same time, I want to remind you, I hope you are all still listening to Dasahandru sermons. Okay? I listen to each and every one of them. And I must say, I take lessons from it. Sometimes the stories that I hear, they make the hairs on my body stand up. They are, these are role models. People who went on to realize the Four Noble Truths. How does one who has understood the truths about this world conduct themselves? If you want to find the answers to their questions, where else would you find them? How does one who has seen the truth conduct themselves? What sort of things do they say? How do they work? How do they talk? How do they interact with others? How do they lead their lives from that point forward? There's only one place you can find answers to these questions. Because either you got to find those answers within yourself, if you have realized the Four Noble Truths, or you're going to have to find those answers in the lives of those who have realized the Four Noble Truths. We bring you the lives of those who have realized the Four Noble Truths because we want them to be an inspiration to you. And then you will compare lives of those who have not realized the Four Noble Truths with these lives, and then come to the conclusion, this is the kind of life I want to live. This is the kind of life I want to aspire to. Doing good for myself and doing good for others. Always moving from good to great. Right? That is the purpose behind those sermons. I know they have been quite popular, and a lot of viewers from around the world seem to be making a great deal of use from them, which is really very promising. So we will continue with those sermons. Satsang has promised to continue with those sermons for as long as we can find stories to relate to you. Because this is all, of course, going back, and we've got to bring information from the past. This is historical information. So sometimes not a great deal of information is available about all of them, but I know he's doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes to get that information. Some of this information is written in books in Sinhala. One of the things I really admire him doing is he spends time with other monks, and he gets them to read the Sinhala books and explain them to him in Sinhala, because he's still working on his Sinhalese, and for him to read the Sinhala book and understand it is, well, he can give you one story a year if he tries to do that. So what he does is he gets help from his fellow monks, and I've seen him do that, and it's really praiseworthy, I think. So he's doing this for your benefit, and also it means a lot of monks at our monastery get the chance to help out with this worthy task, to bring you these stories. And it's always been a dream of ours to turn these lives, bring the essence of these lives of the great Arahants from the books into something audible that people can listen to and leave it as a legacy for many generations after us. So that's what we've started to do, and we will continue to do them. And once we're done with the Arahants, we'll start to talk about the lay upasakas and upasikas from the time of the Buddha, and how they conducted themselves. Chitta Gahapati, Upali Gruhapati, right? These householders, and there are many others. Vishaka, the chief benefactress, Anatha Pintika, the chief benefactor, how they live their lives, and how you can shape their lives according to those lives. Right? So we will continue to help you all in every way we possibly can. I want you all to help yourselves. Right? So make every effort you possibly can to make sense, to understand these sermons. And yes, of course, so do send your questions when you have them. And sometimes these questions I allow you to take some time to ponder over it. Right? So you'll realize that sometimes when you send me questions, I don't necessarily read the question out loud in the next sermon. Some of those questions I go through, and then I give the answer in a sermon without necessarily reading the question. Either way, you just need the answer, right? You know your question, so I give you the answer. So that's why you've got to be paying attention to, when you listen to the sermon, to think to yourself, that is the answer to my question. So whether I read it out loud or not, you must have your question in your mind. So load it into your mind when you sit down for the sermon. And then that way, every sermon you'll find answers. That's the way it works. Okay, so on that note then, we will conclude today's sermon by transferring the merits. Okay then, let us all take a moment to transfer the merits we have all acquired by making offerings to the infinite virtues of the Noble Triple Gem, chanting Pirit, listening to the Dhamma, and engaging in various meritorious deeds. Today, first and foremost, let us remind ourselves how incredibly fortunate we are to be in receipt of the Lord Buddha's teaching. And with immense gratitude, let us transfer these merits to the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, upasakas and upasikas, who have since time immemorial protected and preserved the sublime teachings of the Buddha and passed it down through the generations of the noble lineage in the form of the Tripitaka, which is thankfully available to us today to study, understand, and comprehend the Dhamma. Let us also transfer the merits we have acquired to all members of the Mahasangha present throughout the world, including the chief prelates of all the chapters. We have dedicated their lives to the noble path and have committed themselves towards the betterment of all sentient beings. Let us not forget that among them are the monks and nuns resident in your local temples and nunneries, who have always been by your side through the difficult times of your life. Let us also transfer these merits to Guru Swami Nuhans and all other monks resident at the monastery, as well as the Anagarikas and Anagarikas attached to the monastery. Let us also take a moment to transfer these merits and express our gratitude to those who make great efforts to disseminate the teachings of the Buddha Be that through by transliterating these sermons, sharing them out with others, or inviting others to join them. And may through the power of these merits, if any of them have been born in the woeful plane, redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. And may through the power of these merits they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also transfer the merits we have acquired to our devotees, friends of the monastery, who for the sake of merits continue to sustain the Mahasangha. This includes everyone from those of you who have contributed to the construction of the monastery to those of you who provide the Mahasangha with shelter, arms, robes, and medicines, as well as those who have passed on their know-how and extend their well-wishes. May through the power of these merits they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to our mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, our children, our grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews, nieces, and our elders, friends as well as acquaintances, our employees and employers, and to all those who have helped us, supported us, and assisted us in any way, shape, or form. And by the power of these merits, may they be healed of any physical and mental ailments and overcome any obstacles to their spiritual progress. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to our ancestors who have predeceased us, to all who have been our families, friends, and acquaintances in this infinitely long journey in samsara, and who have helped us, supported us, assisted us in any way, shape, or form they could. Let us take a moment to transfer these merits to them. Let us also transfer merits to the members of the armed forces as well as the police force who have sacrificed their lives to protect the peace and harmony of our nation. May all who have lost their lives in the war, be their friend or foe, rejoice in the merits we have acquired today. Let us also transfer merits to all those who have lost their lives in the natural calamities such as the tsunamis and earthquakes, landslides and pandemics, including the most recent and prevailing pandemic, reminding ourselves that among them will be those who have been our friends and family to us in our long journey in samsara. Let us take a moment to transfer these merits to them. May through the power of these merits, if any of them have been born in the woeful plane, redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And finally, let us all resolve that through the power of the blessings of all the merits we have acquired throughout the day, we be able to witness the advent of many hundreds of thousands of arhants on this blessed land. And finally, may through the power of all the merits we have acquired today, you and I and everyone who has helped make this program a success, become an Arahatun Vahanse or an Arahat Mehinin Vahanse in this very life and in the era of the Gautama Supreme Buddha itself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May the blessings of the Noble Triple Gem be with you all, and we will now